for example, that buck that I killed 2 years ago, I killed because he was bedded up with a doe that was hurt, and he liked pushing those deer up to the interstate that you're talking about, and they were bedded on this big finger in the creek drainage. So I kicked them up, and the next day it came back in, and he was working her the exact same way right back to where they were bedded the day before that, and I shot him right there. So do you think that you get differences based on, like, with the time of the year, the bump and no bedding almost?
Yeah. So during the rut, I don't know if I think it's a little different of a tactic. You're getting in the zone and you're just trying to find where that doe's hanging. So in that instance, I don't know if you necessarily, like, that was a buck. I don't think that was where the buck was bedded. Most likely, it was probably where he was held up with her. But you still kicked them out of there. You got him where you needed to get, and then made the kill. I mean, technically, maybe not a bump and dump, but like an aggressive tactic that yielded in a kill that is very similar. And that's where, like, time of year comes into play too. Like, you don't want to wait those things out in November because it might not be a bedding area. There was numerous spots that you found in Wisconsin that, Jake kind of called me, telling me what was going on, and I would quickly identify those, being familiar with Wisconsin, as areas that weren't core areas. And they were probably burnt out. So, like, you'd probably waste your time. Like, just shredded up areas that isn't necessarily a buck's home range. It's just when they're waiting on those does, they got nothing better to do. So they shred up a place, and you wouldn't know any better to think that, it was just for a couple days they were hanging there, and now they're gone. They'll probably never be back. I mean, like, there might not be any reason. So you can waste your time with that too. But that being said, when you bump them and you get that visual sight, you got to act on that as quick as possible. Or keep that, if it's early, keep that information in the Rolodex for later, like the 40 days later. Like, those, all that stuff matters. That intel, the intel of betting.
This is actually, I watched Cody on another podcast get an argument with a podcaster way back when because of this same question.
Really?
Yeah. Remember when they were asking me, they were like, how did you know to hunt that spot 10 days in a row? And you're like, I just hunted it 10 days in a row, so that's what I had to do.
Yeah. So if you're smart about the way you're hunting this area, it's very hard to burn it out. But you got to be smart about it. So you don't want, like, people here us preach the aggressive tactic, right? Or like the bumping deer. If you repeatedly bump these deer, every day, or even sometimes it only takes a couple, 2-3 times, whatever, you could mess that spot up. Like, so that's where it becomes important to capitalize on that. But if you're talking about now a good area, you got to be smart in your access in, your access out, like, what the type of scent you're leaving by, because you can burn it. But if you're actively scouting, and if that area is remaining hot, hunt it until it's not. So don't get caught up, like that's my philosophy. Don't get caught up in thinking that, like, okay, I hunted this place 2 days and it's burnt out. It doesn't always happen during the day. Like, there's 24 hours in a day. We're hunting for such a small fraction of that with the moon phase and all that. These things, like, that buck could be shredding that ridge at night. He could be getting out of there just 5 minutes before you get there. So that stuff you can't change. You can't affect that, right? So you don't want to leave this area just due to what you see. You want to leave it due to what you know. And if it goes cold, then get somewhere else. But if it's remaining to be a good spot and the sign shows it, then hunt it till you can't hunt it anymore, but hunt it smart. Don't start, like, the worst thing guys will do is they'll justify hunting a sit or hunting a stand with the wrong wind just because it's a red hot spot, which that's going to get you nowhere. You might get lucky every once in a while. If you want to consistently kill deer, you can't roll those dice all the time. Like, oh yeah, well, I'm just going to bank on getting away with the wrong wind. So I would advise against that. If you're doing that, you're going to blow that spot out real quick. So that's how I would answer it.
I've got a pretty good example of this, and I've shared it with a couple guys today. The last 2 years, I've been blessed with the opportunity to go hunt some private land in Pike County, Illinois. And so the first 3 days on this property, like day one, we're all seeing deer. Day two, it's like cut in half, and then by the end of day 3, it's completely cold. Nobody's seeing any deer. And so I'm studying and watching the way that these guys infill and exfill their property, and just the way that the property's laid out. There's a large bold flanking creek that runs the outer edge of the property all the way around, and they're moving into these prefixed stands. And there's a sanctuary on one piece of the property where we know without a doubt that the monster bucks that they do have on that property are bedding inside of that sanctuary. But every time that they go in there, and the road systems that are utilized to get on the property, and the way they're coming out each evening after the hunt, they're educating the deer every single time, and they're pushing the deer. I've watched the deer exit the property out of the backside through the creek. Within 3 days of hunting, I was watching these deer leave the property as they were going in and everything. And then it went cold. And so you hit it right on the head. It's all about your infill, your exfill, how much scent you're leaving. And you know, these guys, they're firm believers in like BS1, the hot doe scent, and all of that kind of thing. And so they're going in there saturated in all of these different scents. I would tell them, you know, you're going into that, I wouldn't hunt that stand. The wind is completely wrong for that stand. Oh, it doesn't matter because I have BS1 on. Okay. So at that point, after the 3 days, there was public land about 15 minutes away from the private farm. And I ended up taking my 1.0 and my 0.5 and just driving 15 minutes and completely walking away from that private land in Pike County, Illinois, to go hunt public ground and try to figure it out the rest of the week, because I quickly realized the way that they were educating the deer. When you're not there, because we're out of state, we're in South Carolina, so all the cell phone, the camera pictures and everything, they're flooding in, right, all the time. But as soon as you get there, within 3 days, everything's gone. So that was a quick indicator for me. The frequency and how they're going in and how they're coming out every day, it went cold. So I packed up and left.
So one thing is complex patterns, you know, create change, right? Solids don't create change. When you move in a solid garment, it's just solid, nothing changes. Very complex patterns they move around, right? So that's one thing. If you're looking in your closet, or if you're looking to get into other things to wear into the woods, I would first encourage you to make sure that those things are not glowing. So a lot of the cottons out there and clothes, they're made with dyes. So if you take a black light to any of your clothes, you will find out that a lot of them, and this will trip you up, a lot of your basic camo that you buy too will actually do this as well. I mean, like I bought a camo shirt from Walmart. This was maybe like 8 years ago or something, but just one of the cheap ones. Tossed a black light over it, and the thing like glowed like a damn light, you know. So be mindful of that. They have things you can wash those clothes in that knocks that right out. But in low light, deer will pick that up. They'll be able to see that glowing. A lot of patches on hats do it. A lot of accessory badges on clothes will do it. You know, lighter clothes do it more than darker clothes, but so that's something to watch out for. Drab colors. Be careful for the dyes. I hunt a lot of flannels. I've been over the course of the last 5 years, I've been testing patterns and stuff, and as you can see, like that's my first model flannel that I'll be coming out with. It's very drabby. It's not too complex. It's, you know, earth tone. I'm a big believer in wool. Wool is just an awesome material. You know, it doesn't absorb that scent or that moisture. You don't have to wash it like that. You literally air that stuff out. If anybody's not, especially down here in this heat, if you are not wearing wool underwear and socks, like you should be, because those, I mean, you could go hike all day and the next day, and I mean, those things ain't gonna smell. You can literally hang them out on the line and they'll be good as new in like 3 hours. So that's a good thing. I often kind of source things from like the backpacking and like just general outdoor industry because they make good quality stuff. It's just usually pretty bright. But if you look, you can find some really quality like down pieces and garments that are not as flashy and just base tones. I mean, honestly, the 2 of the bucks I killed not this past year, but the year before, I wore my bright yellow down jacket the entire season. And it's got a hood on it. Now I would have my flannel over it sometimes, but my yellow hood was popping out. Or I have a yellow vest too that I wear. Like, it's just about, you know, the most efficient system to keep you warm and comfortable versus like what the pattern looks like.
If you want something affordable, LL Bean makes real good affordable stuff. I know it's an old company, but
yeah, LL Bean's it might be a little pricey actually, isn't it?
it's a little way, it's way cheaper. If you were to go to a store and buy like standard fancy camo,
Yeah. Anyway, but yeah. So if you think that killing deer has any effect on camo, just think about a couple hundred years ago, and like just think about like the beginning of time. Nobody ever wore camo, ever. Like, it was never a thing up until.
They were wolves.
What's that?
Like,
Some did.
wolf
Some did, but I mean, if anything, you might be kind of. I don't know if I would be dressing up as a wolf. For deer.
The texture of the material has a lot to do with it, like wool and flannels and the fleece. They actually absorb the light rather than reflect it.
Yep.
So,
And that's where you get into that iffy area. A lot of the backpacking stuff has that nylon type flashy, you know, and that's like sun glare. You can get sun glare off that stuff. Yeah, wool, you will never pull anything off that. Fleece too is a good one. It's got texture, like you said, so that's awesome.
I think for me, when it comes to just what I'm wearing in the woods, it's just gonna be a lot of functionality behind it.
Whatever feels good.
Yeah. Like I mean, you made a joke. I think you wore a suit, Zack, like a costume or something.
Yeah, I killed a doe with my bow. It's a onesie, head to toe, 2XL from Walmart. It's got a bunch of kittens with Santa Claus hats on it. That was a challenge, and I'm gonna keep doing it too.
Goes back to the movement.
Yeah, it's a lot of that. So
That's no joke.
You were asking about there will be other colorways, but what I also did too was adapt a few tree stand specific elements to the garment. Is like so the butt area is extended by like 7 inches. So when you sit down in the stand, you never have that draft coming in through the waistline. It's got a higher collar. It has an internal, like your vest area, has a wind shear with a spray membrane on it. So it really helps, it breathes out, but it cuts down that wind. That on top of the heavyweight wool construction is like really good for an hour later. So my typical go-to like layering system, even for like the frigid temps, I know you guys don't get that stuff down here, but it'll get negative 30 degrees up in Iowa, and you know I have my base layer wool stuff on, and then I'll usually do maybe like a mid-weight fleece, and then when it gets and then that'll go over it. This will always be the outer layer, and it just all that changes throughout the year are the sub layers, right? So even at the coldest temps, if I put a down jacket on over a mid-layer fleece with that on the outside, negative 30, I'm good to go for a 3-hour sit.
Moon guide. Have you ever heard of it?
The moon guide?
The red moon guide. Yep. We got to really paying attention to that, and a lot. It just seemed to nail it dead on the nose.
Yeah. So the moon phase is a very real thing. The red moons. What a red moon typically is when that moon phase, or when the peak moon phase. I think the red is overhead. So when the moon is overhead and it coincides with peak movement hours of dusk or dawn, that's where you get like the best hunting. So the deer have the most gravitational pull for feeding. So that's one thing that it's important to take into account when you're looking at moon phase, right? I don't know if a lot of guys are wearing rubber boots down here. I've always well, not always. Back in the day, I used to wear like your typical Rocky boots and stuff, and I would just burn through them like so quick. Like they were great at first. I mean, a little clunky and big, but comfortable, warm. But the amount of walking I did was just like they'd be shot in a couple months. So early on, I started to gravitate toward, or maybe like midway through, I started to dive into more of like these Western style hiking boots or like mountaineering type shoes, like not necessarily a heavy hunting boot, but more so a hiking boot, right? I've had really good luck with Danners, Scarpa, Hanbog, what's another couple? La Sportiva. Like all these are more, like you'll find them more predominantly like kind of hiking and mountaineering and stuff, but they make really good, like the way I look at this is like these companies have been making boots for people to do nothing but put miles on and to hike up rugged terrain for decades. And a lot of these hunting boots are just, a lot of it's marketing. They put a camel pattern on it, and then they toss a, some cheesy pitch on a sole or something, so there's not a whole lot of like backing I would find. So I always gravitate to those. They're most of these boots are, a lot of them are made like, some are made in the States, some are made overseas in Europe, but they're all resolable too. So a lot of these, like, you can beat these things down for 5-6 years and send them out and get a new sole on them and you're rocking. Like, so they're really good routes there, or options to run.
If you're hunting rubber boots, like that's, I would reference, just going back to lacrosse a little bit, they've been in the lead on, I feel like, on rubber boots for a long time. All the way back to like here in the Grange here, we've probably seen the OG green boot with the yellow topper around it, or you probably owned one at one point. That stuff's awesome. I really like, so they have like I don't even know what it's called, like that softer, what's it called?
Neoprene.
The neoprene, yeah, they got the neoprene liners, but like where I hunt in North Carolina, we have a lot of snakes, so they make a neoprene line like knee-high boots with a snake guard in them. So you kind of get the best of both worlds where you're waterproof, but you're not worried about stepping on a copperhead or something like that. I try to double duty when I can, just because of the frequency at which I run into copperheads and moccasins there. But I don't think you can go wrong, just because I'm sure you guys, like I do, constantly trekking through water. When I go to the Midwest and I hunt with Cody or anywhere in there, I don't have to cross water that much. So I love hikers. They're killer. But down here, I might as well just live in a pair of knee highs. I'm always hunting swamps, so it makes sense.
A lot of people are actually starting to use them for hunting and all, but these are super light. These ones aren't insulated or anything, and I think if you're a first responder, you can get discounts on them, pretty killer discounts. But all in all, I've been really pleased. I've put right many miles on them, and they look a little dirty, but that's about it. Waterproof.
Cody, have you ever used hip waders to get to a spot?
No.
Does anybody else ever use hip waders?
I
to
despise
get to a
hip
spot?
waders.
We got a couple guys. Mike, it's very nice.
I think Crispies too. I heard somebody say it. Crispies too. I love those. Other than my stand, the boots are probably, I don't have to worry about them. I just feel great past 3 seasons.
Commercial trash bags work good too.
Trash.
For the last 2 seasons in Alabama, I struggled with getting cold feet. And what I came to the conclusion of was that in a stand absorbing a lot of the cold, and then on top of that, hiking so far between swapping out of rubber and getting into a merino sock and a lace-up boot. It doesn't have to be anything crazy, but something that the sock's going to get the moisture off your feet can breathe.
Dude, rubber boots are like, man, I feel like they're just a trap for heat and sweat, and they just end in a bad day. Now, they seemingly keep your foot dry at first.
But going back to that wool thing, that's the key takeaway there. Like the wool socks. Like Cody's big fan of alpaca wool socks.
Yeah, alpaca. If you haven't messed around with alpaca wool, that's good stuff. It's just got, like, I think it just kicks it's way better properties than actual like merino wool or standard wool. But
there's another one like river root wool or something.
Yeah.
I can't remember.
The thing about that though is like the trick, like with cold feet, is you have to allow your feet to breathe. It's not even about like you're gonna have the best wool sock, and that wool doesn't absorb that moisture. Like you've got to let that air out. You've got to get that foot dry somehow. So the bigger the boot, the more heavy. Usually the more your foot will sweat. Some people's feet sweat more than others, but more often than not, you'll be better off with a lighter boot that's more breathable to keep your feet warm, which you would think is counterintuitive, but it's not. You don't want to bottle all that stuff in. So
Put it in a first round of feet too. I've heard that.
Yep.
A takeaway too is your feet are probably always going to get cold, but they're going to get really cold in rubber. You have to get where it's a manageable cost.
Yeah. Overpowering force of thermals that will overpower any wind, like it'll overpower the wind direction, and the only way to know how this is going to be affected is by the geographical layout of the land, right? So, you know, these thermals are always settling, and it's all got to do with air temperature, right? The rising and rising and falling of temperature. And even in instances with a stiff north wind, that wind will most likely subside at some point or the other, or sometime or another. And when it does, the natural thermal pull takes over. So if you're in a situation to where you are, this is the easiest way that I can think to describe it. So if you're sitting next to a big, let's say a dried up pond, right? And you're sitting on the edge of it, and you know you have a wind blowing at your back and it's pushing out of that pond as hard as can be. As the sun goes down and the air starts to cool, the thermals will want to fall to the lowest point, to the bottom of that dried out pond, and it will not matter that the wind is blowing the opposite way, because it can only fight the thermal so much. So that's where you get this general creep of this air that is flowing against the direction of the wind. And this is the reason why a lot of people end up getting busted and don't know why. They say, oh, I had the right wind, I don't know what happened. He got scared. Or a lot of times they catch just that little, and it's not a crazy amount of scent, but it's just enough to where it hits their nose, and that can make or break a hunt by far. You know, so that is something that physically cannot be tracked. There's some apps out there that do, I forget the names, but there's some things that'll get you close, and it'll kind of show you what air will do around certain features. But this kind of goes back to what Bobby said before. You don't really know until you're in that situation, and the toughest part about the creep is it's so slow that there's really nothing you can do to gauge how that's happening. There really isn't. Even if you drop milkweed, like that milkweed will eventually fall before that creep takes over. So the only way to really master that, and it's not even possible to master it, but if you understand it, you can make decisions based off of that general concept. And the only way to do that is to get familiar with the things you can tell, like just basic thermal pull and how thermals react around a certain ridge, or how you might get blowback. In Iowa, we have a lot of bluffs, and then like Wisconsin and Minnesota in that area, and there's real steep banks and bluffs, and the wind does some crazy stuff, and the thermal will whip around, and we have a natural thermal siphon down there, right? The Mississippi River. It is a huge, this past year I was hunting right on it. Anywhere within I would probably say a half mile from the riverbank. Now this is high elevation above the river. It didn't matter what direction the wind was going, it was pulling to that river. And I didn't even realize that at first, until I was like, I was well away from the bluffs, right? And then I put it all together, and I'm like, well, it's this giant siphon. You got two huge, probably a couple 100-foot bluffs, right, on the side of a river. It's all flowing one way. That is pulling air constantly. There is no way to hunt that with any sort of westerly wind. You just can't do it. It's all going to suck back the opposite direction. So knowing that changed the way I hunted that piece for forever now. I'll never hunt it the same. And I'll always keep that in mind, that I gotta, and essentially what it did was it made half the property shit.
And those bucks bet on that too.
They know that. They bet on that rim. They bet on that bluff rim, and they know that all day they got scent coming their nose. All day, every day. And then even when they got a hard wind overpowering it, coming to their backs, and they get that creep coming back the other way. And so yeah, there's ways that you can kind of identify it, but it's just tough. It's a tough nut.
And that's interesting to carry over that conversation too. Like that property has tons of hiking trails on it. It's got a bunch of people that are on that property, and those deer are still bedding. I mean, it wasn't 200 yards off the hiking trail, on these steep ridge faces because they just are they're so tuned in.
You don't need to be, you don't always need to be in the most remote location to get good deer activity. A lot of times the overlooked spots and the spots closest to the trailhead are some of the best. And people just walk by them because they think, oh, well, I'm too close to the road. And realistically, if everybody has that same thought, what's the safest spot for the buck? It's right next to the road. So it's hard to make that leap, but don't overlook it if you see it.